Hello, welcome to day 26. I'm Tom Nye back, and this is 365 days toward racial change. Thanks for hanging out with us again. Let's get right into it, as we are just crunching a whole lot of material. We are informed by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson, and his first book. I want you all to get these books. As a Black History reader, 101 questions you never thought to ask. Black labor, white wealth. We're coming out of here and continuing in our series of codes, restrictions, and laws against blacks, slaves, etc. in America in the colonial times, roughly 1600s to the late 1800s, and Dr. Anderson's national plan to empower Black America, Powernomics, which is a lot of good ideas in there. If blacks can manage to come together in a unified way. This series over these past couple days and a few more days, we're looking at the barrage of black, that we might call them black codes, black laws, but they were all white favorable laws. They favored whites, they favored the white community, they encroached the blacks, kept blacks marginalized. They made these laws in the absence of any input from blacks at that time, slave or otherwise. They just kept making rules, and they just kept spouting their will onto these marginalized people, us here in America. Little disturbed. I've started messing around in stocks and things like that, and because financial education was not taught in my home. A lot of things in the black home are problematic and dysfunctional. You can guarantee that you'll find whites, Asians, other races talking about the important things in their home, but with the stresses of jobs, alcohol was present. I think the prevailing slave mind, which is something I'm really trying to breach and communicate and tease out, have people think on in their as we broach this information. Also, white entitlement, white privilege, and how that is passed on. How whites can make a law. I was just at work, so I work evenings, and a new young white guy that was a previous employee came back, and I actually have come into his position in his absence. Well, now that he's back and he's a ready resource, I'm seeing management use him, consult him about things that I've been doing for the past month or so through the holidays, and it really pissed me off, so, but I'm thinking, okay, is this a management decision based on resources and need in the moment, or is this racism coming out, and it's coming out so naturally? Thing is, I'm so awake and sensitive that my fear is that everything is a racist move, a move on race. That my blackness, their whiteness, has some is in the equation, even not explicitly, but subconsciously in the American mind. Racism so embedded that it is just as natural as breathing the air, yet does not allow itself to be named such. Two more resources. I needed to vent that because I'm becoming more and more sensitive to how I've been treated, how I treat, the ways I've bent, and I'm thinking I'm just trying to get people to like me. But what if racism is at the root of some of the divisions in my life, some of the complications that I've run into. We're also going to look at Uncle Tom's Cabin, fictional account of a slave life here in the mid-1800s. Main character, Uncle Tom, written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, back in the mid, excuse me, just getting off work, 1800s. And also behind me, hashtag us too. You'll find the community probably articulating these issues and probably more cohesive. I don't have a whole lot of I don't have big numbers. I don't have thousands of followers or anything like that. You get the email every day as per my commitment. And there's not many in this community. And we'll talk later in the year about if you all want to find out who each other are. So that's my thing. Okay, so I was listening to Warren Buffett. I'm dabbling in stocks, and he's talking about these investments. The guy's 80 years old, and these are things he'd indulged in, toyed around with in his maybe late teens, early 20s, and just stuck with it and plowed ahead. And he's of course a white man, one of the richest people in the world, if not the richest. I think him and Bill Gates go back and forth. But he's talking about stocks and how you hold on to this property, this stock, and watch it grow over time and all that. And he's really talking so matter of factly. And this is what I'm saying in these few days about all these laws is that racism is just so natural on both sides of the equation, blacks and for whites. And hearing him talk about all that privilege and all the thing, he's stationed in Nebraska, and we're going to talk about some of the some issues with blacks moving west and how much resistance that was there, and they didn't have access to the wealth and resources of the West, didn't own land and things like that. So here's Warren Buffett up in Nebraska, talking matter of factly about his success and how his ideas about stocks. But we never hear about where these people got their fortunes, their privilege, whose backs was it built on. It wasn't just they weren't just smart, wise people and investors and hard workers. Somebody else did that work. So we're going to move forward, but I listen to him because he's the number one guy and something I'm interested in, but I'm sober and understanding a portion of his security and whatnot. He can talk about his dad being a hard-working farmer, his grandfather plowing the field by hand, whatever. It's not going to ever equate to his privileged white life here in America, built on the backs of black labor. So here we go. I'm not making a personal judgment about him. I wish I guess this project is growing on me appropriately, and I look around and see all this wealth and opulence, trading hands, other races coming to the table, getting served before blacks. There's got to be a day of reckoning coming. There's got to be. So today we're looking at the Southern restrictions and laws, specifically 1833 to 1847. You can reference some notes. I didn't really go in depth because I think we get the idea. There's a lot of laws, and they come in quick succession, and it varies by state and all that. And I'm sure this list is not exhaustive. So these things occurred in the absence of any black involvement, presence of white influence, privilege, and power. Okay. So let's go. 1833, Kentucky licensing prohibition. No free person of color could obtain a business license in Kentucky. And we find all consistently in America the attack on black commerce, black business growth. It's very minimal. I don't even think we're on the economic radar to any degree. We definitely we don't corner the market in anything. We're definitely very creative and all of that. I was watching some show, and this white female, she's got Botox and her lips are puffed up. She's beautiful and white and blonde, and she had some work done and things like that. And her husband's like this kind of like, well, I don't know if it was her husband, but this other white man is like some kind of white thug, and he's being a mentor to this young white boy at a console to make beats and things like that. It's like, come on, white folks, get it together. I'm disturbed to hear they have melatonin conferences, color, they're working on coloring their skin or something. So it's very, this disturbing behavior to hate and despise a person's color, yet doing everything, mimicking, copying, I guess it's flattery, yet no access to wealth and resources. That's very disturbing, some mental deficiency in white America. So this attack on black business here in Kentucky, 1833, is we see it today in black businesses being sequestered, black businesses not being frequented, no patronage there, So they couldn't have a business license, or no doubt they could go underneath a white owner and be kind of in servitude, but they couldn't have it themselves. Interesting, and I'm sure they weren't in Congress or at the state legislature talking about that law. 1835, Missouri registration law required the registration and bonding of all free blacks, and this strikes to me as the blacks, as the country is expanding westward, they want to have some checks and balances on blacks to prevent them from obtaining land, wealth, and resources. So they do that. In this case, it looks like a census law, register and bonding and things like that. 1835, Georgia employment law prohibited employing blacks in drugstores. Interesting. 1837, South Carolina curfew law required blacks to be off the streets by a certain hour. Okay, to stay off the streets, because we're not safe. You take a hungry animal. Of course you're not going to leave food around the house. Oh, and intentionally hungry. You've starved this animal. You've abused this creature. So you find your nightlife a little challenged suddenly there in South Carolina. And there were curfews all over. Dr. Anderson's just highlighting some things here. 1838, Virginia School of Law forbade blacks who had gone north to school to return. So they didn't want your educated ass talking up stuff in Virginia because you're going to excite uh, the uneducated blacks, and that's going to cause some trouble. So you go away to school, they give you their blessing, just don't come back. 1838, North Carolina marriage law declared void all interracial marriages to the third generation. So, there were now I'm guessing this is more slave owners, white power marrying the black woman. Probably not so much black men marrying white women. That I don't I haven't done my research for it. As we go through the year, we'll dive into these even deeper. But remember, I talked about how the white men went into their black slave women and produced all these mulatto quadroon children, and almost a whole new race of people. Whole institutions were built up around these lighter skinned blacks. They were still blacks, still slaves, still marginalized. Just master had his way. Now from that we can read in Frederick Douglass writings and up to date with Angela Davis writings about how now with the white masters, male masters, having all these orgies and sexuality with their black slaves, how they turn it as though black men are hypersexual and insatiably hungry for white female flesh, and how now black females are promiscuous and their morals are questionable, from white power activity. And that's not the only thing America twists. We drop the atom bomb as a nation, yet prevent everybody else from having it or doing it. We see it all over the place. Politics, this hypocrisy, and white America just gets away with it over and over again. And we have yet to. America just has not been called to task about that. It's interesting. We're sucking up all this oil from all around the world. We got our own reserves. That those fossil fuels are finite resources. There's a whole lot of it. This is a planet. But when it runs out, then America will have its own. But, we're already moving towards more electric cars and more renewable energy methods of getting along in life. But it's interesting. America's path, and it just seems this inexorable march towards power and more power, and accumulates. Oh boy, America. Oh, marriage law. All right, 1841 South Carolina observing law. This is a strange one. Forbade blacks and whites from looking out the same window. Probably children playing, but I guess they didn't want to see that in one pane of glass. Like the mentality behind some of these laws has to be pretty incredible and ridiculous. 1842 Maryland Information Law. Felonied blacks demanding or receiving abolition papers. So you don't want to have any abolitionist papers. I know Uncle Tom's Cabin was forbidden in the South, along with abolition papers. You're liable to be lynched, hung on the spot for having any of this material. Now, literacy was pretty high for whites, though, too. So it's interesting to would they know what they're looking at. um, there's, remember Denzel Washington in the movie The Book of Eli, and those guys couldn't read. This other guy's looking for the Bible, and he wants to use it as a powerful tool against the ignorant. Well, he's sending out these illiterate men to find it, but they don't know. They don't know what a book. They know what a book looks like, but they don't know if they got the Bible or Little Red Riding Hood. They don't know the difference. Okay, observation law. Felony abolition papers. Okay, 1844 Maryland color tax placed a tax on all employed black artisans. So if you were skilled, masonry, let's see, Maryland. So um, well, possibly any fine woodmanship work in a mansion and things like that. Well, because you're black, you get a tax. It doesn't. And were you at the Maryland legislature participating in that vote, making that? They said no. We need more revenue, more money. Therefore, first people we go to is the blacks. They're working hard. We already have raped them and robbed them and appropriated their labor and all that. So, well, let's take it all. Source some more. 1844 South Carolina amusement law prohibited, listen to this, prohibited blacks from playing games with whites. Right? And that's interesting because, even today in sports, blacks dominate. If blacks in general commanded more wealth and economic prosperity, then we would own all the whites dominated sports. The whites dominate in the cold sports because you need to generate cold practically year round to um, excel in those activities: snowboarding, skiing, hockey, um, curling, you name it. Um, winter sports, that it's dominated by white people because white people can go to these places. I got a friend goes, she's a white friend of mine. I'm very close to her. Love her dearly. She goes to the mountains. It's winter, they go to the mountains. I'm from the East Coast, so I go. When I was younger, we go to the shore. Now we're a black family, so we don't go to the shore always like the white kids, but that's the idea. In the warm months, go to the shore. And this mountainous area that I live in, they go to the mountains in the winter to ski and be cold and stuff, right? So, but it costs money to stay up there. There's a lot of you gotta be ready to pay up to participate in the resources up there. So I get all that. You got to put into the infrastructure and things like that. But blacks don't command that kind of wealth in general. So white sports, winter sports, are dominated by white people. Um, so this blacks playing games with whites, you can imagine the blacks probably excelled. Even as kids, they're playing. I mean, we had Negro leagues, we had separate, segregated sports and things like that. The athletes, they picked the top athletes out of there, decimated those sports, Negro leagues and things like that. Um, kept the cream of the crop to bolster their white teams to make them more competitive. You know, that's the long view of keeping play time segregated. 1845, Georgia contracting law prohibited contracts with black mechanics. I'm sure this included the blacksmith trade and things like that. Again, keeping blacks economically marginalized, unable to participate in the national economy. Blacks did not generate their own revenue and wealth. They were probably doing their best trying to keep their farms from being burned and their livestock from being poisoned, as well as the lynch lottery. Black skin, got lynched upwards of one a day, and all of that chaos going on. So the skilled laborer, black mechanic, now he's unable to reach some prosperity, some wealth, as the whites are gathering it all. And it's not necessarily going to come from the black community that's already decimated, marginalized, and such. 1846, Kentucky incitement law provided imprisonment for inciting slaves to rebel. That's an interesting one. I wonder what was going on in Kentucky, the mid-1840s, right? I know Harriet Beecher Stowe's book here is the mid-1800s, Uncle Tom's Cabin. So there's abolitionist talk. Running away north and south, although Dr. Anderson, as he's going to argue, we're going to talk about this more about slaves retreating more south, not winding their way primarily northward, and Canada was not the safest place, Dr. Anderson jokingly talks about Detroit and whatever Canadian city is across the lake from Detroit, but you had slaves going back crossing each other thinking they're going to find better life when they're both running towards slavery. Incredible. And finally, this is page 226 of Black Labor and White Wealth. Missouri, 12 years later, from their registration law, the law I said was more surveillance, a census, getting numbers and ideas of blacks moving west in the country. But this 1847 literacy law, self-explanatory, prohibited teaching blacks to read and write. Not only are you economically sequestered, you're not going to have access to white wealth, but now you're going to be illiterate and not understand what you're reading, not have access educationally to what you need to better yourself, to understand. Even if you got a hold of the Constitution, of literature that even reinforced black marginalization, you still wouldn't be able to read it. Right? It's interesting, in the Bible, Paul instructs Timothy to continue to read. I forget if the reference is to slaves, but to continue to read to the people. Illiteracy back then was a problem. Paul understood it. Now he's, of course, promoting the scriptural sense. He's after their souls and whatnot, but they have no access to the text, the book that's going to tell them about that. So therefore, Timothy has to read to them. Right. So being able to read is a powerful thing. Being able to read and comprehend, being able to write. So now you can write something down on paper, send it long distances, or copy it. and send that same message to many people. Yeah, that's a very dangerous position for slaves and marginalized black people to have. So there's more of a blow by. We got a couple more days left. We got another day of the Southern peace, and then we're gonna move up north to see what's happening there. Because history, it really it gives some lip service to the North being slave, promoting slavery, all the colonies, the nation being a slave holding nation, but then the North kind of snaps out of it and is seen as a good place for former slaves and free blacks to go. But I tell you, if you know your history about Dr. Martin Luther King, when he went to Chicago, I think that's where he was hit in the head with a brick. Um, his comment, I'm going to paraphrase, was something like, the whites from the South need to come up here and learn how to hate. All right, so slavery never went anywhere. We're going to talk about emancipation or free blacks as more of an economic issue and not the white slave-holding nations being stunned in their moral sense, in their moral senses. Okay. So there we go. Thanks for hanging out. You can read the notes. There may be some more information in there. Also, get the books. Please get the books. Good hearing from you. Please share if you watch the videos. I need to write this in the notes. Please share. We're coming up on, I think next month. Well, maybe I'll try to see if we can each get one more subscriber, one more person interested in this topic in the year going forward. Black History Month and all. So thanks again. I'm Tomlin's Nyback. This is 365 Days Towards Racial Change. Thank you very much. We'll see you again soon.